The global warming crowd tells us that electric cars are the next big thing. Well, I've got bad news for them. Electric cars are not the next big thing, and they will never be the next big thing. And that's because we are unable to produce enough electricity to power an all-electric car fleet, and I'm going to prove that in this video. Around the world, politicians have set targets for phasing out gas-burning vehicles and replacing them with electric vehicles. Here in the state of Washington, where I live, legislation has been considered that would outlaw the sale of gas-burning vehicles by 2030. In the state of California, the governor has signed an executive order that outlaws gas-burning vehicles by 2035. And so in response, many automobile companies have announced that they're developing designs and building manufacturing facilities for electric vehicles, and they're spending tens of billions of dollars doing all that. And I've got bad news for them. They're not all going to be successful in their investments, and I'll show you why. So let's go through the numbers here. Most of the data here, in fact, all the data here comes from the United States government from various sources. So over here on the right, if you don't believe what I'm saying, you can go to these websites, you can get the numbers yourself, and do these calculations for yourself if you want. In 2019, Americans drove about 3.25 trillion miles. And the average energy consumption of an electric car is about 0.3 kilowatt hours per mile. So if you simply multiply the energy consumption times the number of miles driven, it would take about 1 trillion kilowatt hours of electricity per year to power a car fleet. In 2020, the total amount of electricity production was about 4 trillion kilowatt hours. So to power an all-electric car fleet would require a 24% increase in just the electrical generation capacity. Okay, well, how much is that? So near me here in the state of Washington is one of the biggest hydroelectric dams in the world, the Grand Coulee Dam. And so if you do the math on how much energy Grand Coulee produces and compare that to how much it would take to power an all-electric car fleet, you would have to build the equivalent of 47 Grand Coulee dams. But the problem is, you can't. All hydroelectric sites have already been developed. There are no more. And in fact, the politicians are talking about taking down dams because of their effect on fish populations. Okay, so hydro's out. All right, well, how about nuclear? When you run the same analysis on nuclear energy, it turns out that you would need 116 nuclear power plants to power an all-electric car fleet. The problem is nobody wants a nuclear power plant in their backyard. It takes many years, at least 10 to 15, to build a nuclear power plant, and they're prohibitively expensive. And so we haven't built any nuclear power plants in the United States for decades, and it is unlikely we would in the future. All right, so nuke is out. What the global warming crowd will tell you is we need wind turbines and solar panels. So let's take a look at wind turbines. When you run the analysis on how many wind turbines it would take, as shown here on this chart, we'd have to build about 205,000 wind turbines to be able to power an all-electric car fleet. It turns out that electricity doesn't come from the wall, that in fact there is a very large and very expensive infrastructure behind it. So what I just talked about was the generation side of it. But between the generating plant and the outlet in your home is a transmission system that carries electricity over long distances from where it's generated to where it's needed. And then as the electricity gets close to the point of delivery, Then there's distribution lines that are at lower voltage that go the last few miles to your home. Transmission lines cost thousands of dollars, or excuse me, millions of dollars per mile to erect. And the distribution lines are also very expensive. And if you take a look at where people live versus where the wind blows and where the sun shines, which is where you have to put the wind turbines and the solar panels, now you've got to build thousands of miles of transmission lines to get the electricity from where it's generated to where it's needed. And it costs, as I said, millions of dollars per mile to put up these transmission lines. So in summary, the policy objective to replace gas-burning cars with electric cars is unachievable because the science and the economics simply don't permit it. It's not going to happen. And so gasoline will always be required to power the majority of the American car fleet. And oil companies, those hated oil companies, are always going to be part of the energy industry. And automobile companies developing electric cars are going to be unable to sell them because nobody's going to want to buy them because they're not going to be able to charge them. There's not enough electricity to power an all-electric car fleet, and there never will be. Never. Some electric utilities, in response to the growing popularity of electric cars, are setting up special rate structures where charging loads are going to pay market rates, meaning that if the utility has to go out and buy power on the open market, those charging loads are going to have to pay whatever the utility has to pay to get the electricity. But the problem's going to be that there won't be electricity available at any price to power cars because the system will be maxed out. There won't be any spare generation capacity to buy. So the next time you hear somebody from the global warming crowd talking about all electric vehicles and getting rid of gas burning cars, know that it's not going to happen, that there's not enough generation, transmission, and distribution capacity available to power electric cars. Now, in the meantime, you've also got people talking about outlawing natural gas for space heat and water heating in buildings. You've got these cryptocurrency people sucking down massive amounts of electricity. You've got companies like Microsoft and Google putting up data centers that do have very large electricity demands. So I'm going to talk about some of those other things in a future video, but with the point that I'm making here with this video is that this idea that we're going to go to an all-electric car fleet, it's not going to happen. It is physically and scientifically and economically impossible for that to happen. Sorry to break the news to you, but that's the reality, and that's the way it is.